Well, I'm humbled and honored to be here. And I'm a little reluctant to talk about myself. I was taught not to do that. I come from Denmark, South Carolina. It's about 2.5 hours south of where Beth grew up. And I was the deacon in one of the churches there. We have 2 churches in that community for many years. And my purpose for being here is to visit with Luke and Beth Miller family as we determine their future in maybe a position in another part of God's kingdom. What I want to title what I share with you this morning is the character of a church leader. A few years ago, a neighboring landowner called me to see if my boys and I would like purchasing a corner of his life's land that lays just down the road from us on our side of the road. They have this huge tract of timber across from us. And the ironic thing was, I wasn't prepared for that. I had talked to this lady's father 25 years before, and I asked him, I said, you got about 15 acres on my side of the road. Would you consider selling that to me? And he says, yeah, man, you ought to have that, but you know, I'm 80 years old and I ain't never sold no land before, and I'm still looking for land to buy. And in the fullness of time, he died and was buried with his forefathers, and all his vast sums of wealth and his great tracts of land were passed on to his sons and one daughter. Several years later, I got up the nerve to talk to the one boy, and I said, Bo, would you consider selling me that piece of land? And he lived on Hilton Head Island. That don't mean much to you all, but Hilton Head Island is down on the coast, and it's where presidents and celebrities go, and the rich and famous. And he was not at all pleasant to work with. He's tried to shame me and humiliate me. And I guess from Hilton Head Island, a few acres of Bamberg County swampland looked real valuable to him. And again, I felt defeated and somewhat abused. And so it was such a blessing when the sister and her husband contacted me, and they said, you know, we inherited all that land as we settled up with my brothers, and they were just so pleasant and gracious to work with, not arrogant or condescending at all like their snarky brothers. And so he said, you figure out the terms, find an attorney, and we'll see that it happens. And so I met with the surveyor soon after to show him the corners and some of the boundary lines and old survey markers. And as we walked through the briars and the jungle vines and the poison ivy, I was impressed as I listened to him as we fought our way through the brush. And he says, well, I can tell Dickie All has surveyed this place at some time in his life. And I says, well, how do you know that? He said, by the marks that he leaves. And then he went on to show me the different things that a surveyor in their trained eyes can pick up and know who had went on before. Axe marks in the bark, or buggy axles were real popular back in the day when surveyors marked most of the land in our area. And so he had a trained eye, and he picked up on these things. And then those things are recorded as deeds in the Bamberg County Courthouse. And I want to suggest to you this morning that leadership is so much the same way, establishing, maintaining, and defining boundaries. Many or most of you are either in leadership or will be called to leadership positions, either in your home or the classroom, or in some capacity, leading on to another generation. Will they follow you to faithfulness? Or perhaps it may be someone that you can redirect, someone that you can help, who is misguided and have lost their way. And as you point them to the marks that have been given to you, marks made not with axe and iron pins or fluorescent colored ribbons, but marks in your life that point others to Jesus and to God. These are the words and actions that are not recorded in the archives of any county courthouse, but on the hearts of the redeemed, men and women, mere mortals such as you and I, as we lead those to God brought into our circle of influence. And may I ask you this morning, how are you leading? Many are depending upon you. Someone has said this: the beauty of not planning is that failure comes as a complete surprise and is not predicted by periods of anxiety. I want to read you a poem written by Arthur Guterman in 1927 called The Pioneer. Long years ago, I blazed a trail through the lovely woods unknown until then, and marked with cairns of splintered shale, a mountain way for other men. For other men who came and came, they trod the path more plain to see, and gave my trail another's name, and no one speaks or knows of me. The trail runs high, the trail runs low, where windflowers dance in Columbine. The scars are healed that long ago my axe cut deep on birch and pine. Another's name my trail may bear, but still I keep in waste and wood my joy, because the trail is there, my peace, because the trail is good. And so I want to go through some biblical examples of men who led with integrity. The first one is Noah. The Bible says that Noah was a righteous and blameless man, and that he and his family lived in such a time much like our own, when society and humanity had pretty much gone to seed. The setting and description of humanity at the beginning of Genesis chapter 6 is a very dark and bleak outlook on what God had created in Eden and pronounced good. And we know that in the beginning of chapter 6, God said how he looked on man's wickedness and across the earth, and became every inclination of his thoughts, that the heart of men was only evil continually. And God said, I repent that I ever made these sorry people. It's a very good description of men and women today who've not given their heart and life over to the lordship of Christ. And then we have verse 6. And God was grieved that he had made the man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Has your heart ever been filled with pain at something that you have done? You have remorse, grief, and pain, and it causes you to do something about that. If you've lived long enough, I'm sure that you have made something that ended up in the dumpster. But thankfully, there's a new start and a new way, another way forward. Noah's character stands out like a beacon on a hill amongst the sea of human depravity. And we have this in verse 9. And Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. And this has become my all-time favorite Bible verse. And could it be said of me that Carl was a righteous man, blameless among the people of my time and in my community, and that Carl walked with God? I would be so honored if that could be written on my grave's headstone if God tarries. So God said to Noah, and he laid out his plan. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't glamorous. The task at hand was huge. So how do you and I respond when we are asked to respond to God's call in our life and submit in areas of service or obedience? Noah was given a choice. He wasn't really given a choice in this matter if shipbuilding was really his gifting or calling, and if he would maybe be better at something else. Noah heard God's call, and our brother mentioned that too. He heard God's call and he said, "Yes, Lord." And the responsibility that God laid on Noah's shoulder must have been of a huge magnitude. But it was manageable because God gives strength, he gives ability, and he enables those he calls into leadership roles. And because of Noah's previous character traits, he was righteous, he was blameless, and he walks with God. God knew that he was the man to give leadership to the building of the ark. And so I want to suggest to you this morning that character comes before the call, not after. Don't think that you're going to nominate somebody for church leadership and that he will grow up. Don't do that. Character comes before the call. God called Noah because he was blameless, he was righteous, and he walked with God. He didn't hope that he would get that way as he was building his ark. Our family had a major building project a few years ago. It took almost a year. Noah, it took 50 years or more. We had willing workers. Noah had naysayers, scoffers, and those who hoped to see him fail. We had track hoes, excavators, dirt pans, concrete trucks, man lifts, telehandlers, sky cranes, and a whole boatload of Milwaukee tools. Noah had much less. No skidders, no logging equipment or sawmills. He didn't have laser levels or air nailers. He didn't even have a cell phone to call the lumber yard to order supplies or to scope out the drip on social media during his lunch break, as many do. Hebrews 11:7, but Noah, by faith when warned about things yet not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. But by faith he condemned the world, and he became the heir of the righteousness that comes from faith. And so no doubt Noah's job was very lonely. He was the last guy left that even cared about God. He was asked to do something that had never been done before. And I could just hear the neighbors coming by the job site say, "Hey Noah, what you doing? Building a new dairy barn? Or some kind of floating chicken sheds?" "What do you mean it's going to rain? We ain't never had rain before." Or perhaps another neighbor sold tickets to come see Noah's Folly, the world's first religious theme park. And can you imagine gathering all that hay and silage and birdseed and nuts? Noah had even a greater assignment. He was the spiritual leader of his day and time. 2 Peter 2:5, but Noah saved the eighth person, and he was a preacher of righteousness. And no doubt he was called to be a contractor, to be a shipbuilder. But more than that, he was called to warn the people at a society adrift about their loose living, no spiritual moorings, and the Bible calls him a preacher of righteousness, not a shipbuilder. What an honor, what a responsibility. I want to shift now to Abraham and a life of consistency. Consistency is described as firmness of constitution and character, the harmony of conduct and the practice of one's profession, showing steady conformity to character or profession, belief, or custom. The scriptures tell us in Genesis chapter 22, you know that chapter, that God brought Abraham to a test. And God tests all of us, some to a greater or lesser degree, and some have greater or lesser consequences. But I would like to look a little bit at Genesis chapter 22. Failure is not a good option. It is so important that you pass this test for future generations, depending on your commitment and your conduct as you raise your families. There will be an opportunity for small little corrections along the way in the course that you've chosen, and God has mercy on us. But there's no second time around with your family. You get one shot at it. Please take it seriously. There's only one shot at church leadership. You can't go back and redo it. Take your responsibility seriously. Listen as I read Genesis 22:1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham, and he said, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. And God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering, on one of the mountains that I will tell you about." And early the next morning, Abraham got up and he saddled his donkey, and he took two of his servants and his son Isaac, and they cut enough wood for the burnt offering, and he set out to a place that God told him about. Now on the third day, Abraham looked up, and he saw the place in the distance, and he said to his servants, "Y'all, you stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there, and we will worship, and we will come back to you." And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and then he carried the fire and a knife. And as the two of them went on up together, Isaac spoke and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood is here," Isaac said, "but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together, and when they reached the place that God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it, and he bound his son Isaac, and he laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then he reached out his hand and took his knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out from him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said, "and do not harm anything to him. I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." And Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by his horns, and he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide," and to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." So Abraham's obedience and faithfulness to God's request is perhaps one of the most emotional stories in all the biblical accounts, right next to the crucifixion of Jesus. And there is so much detail that is not given, but yet there is enough given to stir even the coldest, stoniest heart. I want to tell you this morning there will be times of testing for every family. Life's experiences can be difficult as you seek to take a biblical position with your family and the choices you need to make every day. We live in a world that is hopelessly blown off course spiritually, morally, in Christian teachings and values. You know, a lot has changed in the last 60 plus years, but it wasn't easy back then either. I grew up and went to public school. The Christian school movement had not really yet started in most communities, and in the morning, our public assemblies, we had to say, or we were asked to pledge allegiance to the flag. How many of y'all know what pledge allegiance to the flag is? You know what that is? Y'all don't do that at your school, do you? Well, we had to. We were supposed, we had this paralysis kind of shoulder, couldn't get it. We didn't want the school teacher to see us being rebellious, but we didn't know why, but we knew we weren't supposed to do it. And then there was this whole prom and dancing and ungodly music at those events. And then there was evolution versus creation that was coming in school curriculum. And the gross immodesties of the 60s and 70s when the miniskirt was in. And then there was gym shorts and long pants. And all the Mennonite guys, we had to wear long pants and T-shirts. And the other guys, they had shirts and skins to pick up teams. And all those things. But I don't remember there was a high casualty rate amongst the young people. They knew what their parents taught them. And then at 18, we registered with the draft for military service and needed to state our position on a Christian's participation or non-participation in war. And there was alternate service, and the spiritual casualty rate was very high in some communities during the 1W program years. Parenting wasn't for cowards and sissies back then. It still isn't today. I want to read you a short story written by E.J. Swam from Ontario, and he wrote this in 1969. And it's a poem about a little story about Abraham. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains that I will show you. I read you that verse. I was fortunate in having been exposed to biblical teachings of non-resistance from my earliest memory. And on approaching maturity, I endeavored to rethink these positions for myself. This resulted in a staunch decision that I could not participate in any form of Army service. Early in the morning of 1918, the last year of World War I was drafted into the Canadian Army. Father and son walked solemnly the 2 miles to the railroad depot as we took the train to Hamilton. Our conversation was punctuated with periods of silence, and at one point, Dad finally spoke. I feel this morning something like Abraham must have felt on his way up to Mount Moriah. Now, certainly, I would not be so immodest to elevate my parent to the status of father of the faithful. I cannot escape, however, remembering his bravery and Christian fortitude as he placed the whole ordeal. One instance of his heroism may suffice. While doing the morning chores shortly before my departure, he directed the following conversation. My boy, you'll soon be leaving me, and we cannot tell what the consequences will be. I want to ask you this morning, if worse comes to worse, how is it with your soul? To this, I took a rapid retrospective of my past and recalled the 2 crises in my spiritual life of which he was aware. They were my conversion at 12 years of age and my entire commitment to Christ at 19 years. All I said in reply was, it holds good this morning. What followed was a bit dramatic. He put his bony left arm around my neck and said, my boy, I don't know how I will get along here on the farm with only one arm, but I want you to stand true to God in your conviction at any price. I would rather get word that you were shot than to know that you compromised your position and disobeyed your Lord. Such rugged faith, such a staunch belief produced a buoyancy in my soul that I needed. I could never forget. And then we went into our granary and had a season of prayer together. And what a prayer meeting that was. And so this morning, we learned something about Abraham's character in a previous chapter and why God had chosen him and Sarah to be the family line through which Christ would come into the world. Genesis 18:19, for I have chosen him so that he may direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham all that he promised. Such a high compliment. And it is my prayer this morning that each of you, and myself included, that it could be said of us as we endeavor to raise our families for the Lord in his service. We don't know all the narrative that took place in Genesis chapter 22 of Abraham and Isaac going up on the mountain, but we can only surmise and guess some things. And so when God called, Abraham answered, behold, here I am. And so Abraham trusted God Almighty as he followed him up from Ur of the Chaldees to a land that he promised him. And so many of you have left comfortable places back in the motherland, wherever it may be, to follow God to a place that God would show you. A church leader must give up a fair bit too. Study on Friday and Saturday, travel, meetings at night, away from home when he'd rather be home with his family. Abraham's response to offering up Isaac was staggering. He gave instant and unquestioned obedience. It said that he got up early in the morning and he cut enough wood for a sacrifice. He loaded his donkey. Off to where? To follow God. How quick are you and I to follow the gentle or maybe not so gentle promptings of God in our life? James chapter 4, verse 17, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is what? Sin. You know, it was 50 miles up to Beersheba from Mount Moriah, a 3 days journey, and I don't know what they talked about or if they talked at all. The trip, I'm sure, was probably mostly silent and difficult, probably a lump in Abraham's throat. And he's wondering, did I really hear God right? Abraham knew that God had indeed planned a future around his son Isaac. And even though he may have felt God was going to great extremes, he knew that he would bring him back. He says, we will come back down and meet with you all again. He didn't say, I'm coming back. We will come back. Abraham knew that somehow God was going to work this out. And then he ties the firewood on Isaac's back and took the fire pot and the knife and climbed on. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about Isaac here because he's playing a pretty significant role. How old was Isaac? What do you think? How old do y'all think Isaac was? All right. He was old enough to carry the wood, and the wood had to be enough to make a hot fire for a sacrifice. We're not talking just a little tote of wood, you know, like a little Boy Scout fire. Most commentaries suggest that he was either 15 to 25 in that area. And so Abraham is now probably 115 to 125 years old, and no doubt the wood was too heavy for him to carry up that mountain. And so he asked Isaac to do it for him. Why didn't Isaac say, Dad, I ain't doing that? Got a ball game tonight. I mean, what you're offering me is really boring. I mean, how much fun is it? There's nothing in this for me. Me and my buds, we're going to eat out, and we're going to hang out, you know, like there's grapevines swinging in the tree. No, I don't know. Why didn't he just call up his mom and say, something happened to Dad? I think he must have been out in the sun too long all day. We better call 911. And why did Isaac just stand there and let Abraham tie him up? And you know, if he was a big teenager, Abraham probably really had to struggle to get him up on the altar, and Abraham probably had to kind of climb up there himself. Why didn't he just run away? And so I'm asking you, young fellas, would you lay real still for your dad and let him tie you up and bring that knife out? I can't answer all those questions, but I have a pretty good idea. Abraham lived a life of consistency, and he had demonstrated that close walk with God to Isaac and to others who knew them. Isaac knew he could trust his dad. And we know that Abraham was fallible. He had a fibbing tongue. He had a gorgeous wife. And I remember the Bible story books that my mother used to read us, and I didn't think she was over gorgeous, but the Bible said that she was. But yet, in spite of his failures, his heart and conduct was follow God at all costs, nothing held back. And so I'm pleading with you, mothers and fathers, live a life of consistency before your children. You cannot retake this test. I want to talk about Moses. Moses, an example of humility. Of all the many traits and talents and abilities that make for a useful and effective leader, the one that is often lacking but yet should be the highest on the list is humility. In Numbers chapter 12 is the account of Aaron and Miriam making fun of their brother's leadership, and they talk disrespectful to their brother, and they scorn his taste in women. They spoke against him because his wife was of a different nationality. Perhaps she was dark complected, we don't know all. But Numbers 12:3 says that Moses was a very humble man. He was more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. That is quite a compliment. And there was a little town one day had a festival each spring, and they gave a man the Humility of the Year award, a little lapel pin, but they had to take it away from him because he wore it. And so that's a little bit the way humility is. Exodus 34, we have the account of God telling Moses to chisel out these two stone tablets, just like the first ones that you broke. And so we have to go back and see what happened before. And you know about the golden calf and all that stuff that happened. I'm not going to read all of that. But in Exodus 32, it says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, 'Go down at once, for your people you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, they are a very obstinate people. Now let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and I will destroy them, and I will make out of you a great nation.'" And so you know how that went. 3 times in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers, you will see where God told Moses to stand back. I am so totally done with these people. I'm going to wipe them out, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And that would be a huge ego boost to most people. But Moses said, "Please, God, don't do that. What will the Egyptians think if you brought all your people out here and killed them? They say you were strong enough to get them out of Egypt, but you weren't strong enough to take them to the rest of the way. And we have all those examples of Moses pled with God, and each time God says, okay, Moses, I'll give them another try. Such humility. I just can't think of a greater example of humility than Moses. There is a huge temptation for those in leadership positions to become proud, self-important, a control freak. It's all about them and their agenda and what will make them look good. Ken Brenneman was a bishop in southern Ontario. I remember him, and he says this: nothing is as intoxicating as a sip of authority. Howard Hendricks says, the measure of a leader is not what you do, but what others do because of you. You teach what you know, but you reproduce what you are. That is so true. The lack of humility is pride. It's easy to see in others, but seldom in ourselves. 1 Samuel 2:7, the Lord maketh the poor, and he maketh the rich, and he bringeth low, and he lifteth up. But men often express their pride in their success in vocation or personal accomplishment, their toys or adventures. Example would be the biggest book, their pimped out pickup trucks, or the way they carry themselves. Former President George Bush, in referring to a man's swagger, he says in Texas, we call it walking. I remember of a man in the community where I grew up. He was just a common old guy, but he referred to one of the brother church leaders, and he says, I kind of like the guy, but he leans back too far when he walks. Or then I've heard it referred to as a power walk. Proverbs 30:29. There are 3 things that are stately in their stride, 4 that move with stately bearing: a lion, mighty among beasts, who retreats before nothing, a strutting rooster, a he-goat, and a king with his army around him. Unfortunately, that applies sometimes to church leaders and their power walk and their power trip, and it's about them and not a life of service in humility. Failure to acknowledge that all of our successes have ultimately come from God often tends to lack humility and does not honor God. It will be very difficult to be an effective leader with a prideful heart. And I have quite a few verses there that I could read, but I'll keep moving. Moses was such an effective leader. His heart was bent for the good of those he was leading as he showed them the way. Lord, if you can't forgive these people, and if you can't give them another chance, then just blot me out. Scratch my name off of your big book. And God said, fine, go back and lead them, and I will deal with their sins on a case-by-case basis. Humility in leadership, I cannot stress it enough. I want to talk just a little bit now about Samuel. Samuel's character showed his compassion, his pain and sorrow at the disobedience of God's people. The scriptures say that he cried all night, and Brother Wilbur talked about compassion. A godly leader who has character will also feel sorrow and remorse at the error and wrong choices and sin in the church of others he has been called to lead. Was recently in another community and for church at Sunday morning, And there was a lady that had been a member of that church for many years, but she struggled. I don't know what all the issue was, but she had just called up this church leader and said she's done. She's abandoning the church, she's abandoning the faith, and she's leaving. She left her husband and she's gone. And I'm sure that they invested many hours and days and nights with that couple. She's gone. And this brother got up sharing with the congregation that morning that one of the sisters had decided to leave the shelter and fellowship with a local congregation and become a friend of the world. It wasn't good riddance. Thank God we don't have to deal with her anymore. That man choked up and couldn't read. He cried and he wept as a true shepherd over the loss of that one sheep. And Samuel said, "It repenteth me," and God said this in 1 Samuel, "and it repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be the king. So he turned his back on following me, and hath not performed my commandments." And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. It's easy for a church leader to just get sick and tired of dealing with the stress of immature and wayward people. But please, be like Samuel. He cried to the Lord all night for King Saul. The story is told of a church in a small town that got a new deacon. Everyone was talking about how wonderful he was. The town skeptic asked one of the church leaders, "Well, why is this deacon better than the last one you had?" The parishioner answered, "Well, the last one told us we were sinners and that unless we repented, we'd all go to hell," was the answer. And the skeptic said "And what does the new deacon say?" "Well, the new deacon, he tells us we're all sinners unless we repent and accept Jesus, we're all going to hell," was the answer. And the skeptic shrugged his shoulders and said, "I fail to see any difference between the two." And the parishioner answered, "The new deacon says it with tears in his eyes." Luke 13:6 is a paraphrase. "And then he told them a parable. A man had a fig tree and planted it in his vineyard. And he went out to look for fruit on it, but he did not see any. So he said to the deacon or church leader, who took care of the vineyard, 'For 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree, and I haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should I use up the soil?' 'Sir,' the deacon replied, 'leave it alone for another more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears any fruit next year, fine. But if not, then I will cut it down.'" A poem from A Good Minister by Howard Bean. "His thoughts were slow. His words were few and never formed to glisten. But he was such a joy to all his friends. You should have heard him listen." Well, it's time to close. I had a story I wanted to read you, and do y'all want to hear it? Robert J. Baker grew up in northern Indiana. He did not come from Anabaptist background, and he was a contributor to a Sunday school periodical that we used to get. And he wrote this story. The title was called "My Good Bishop." "I was contently, perhaps lackadaisical, reading the scriptures the other morning when I ran into Psalm 78:72. And it was like hitting a specially prepared section on the toll road where the pavement has been surfaced so your tires rumble, and warning of the approach of collection booths. Immediately, I went on red alert, and there was something special in that phrase, and David shepherded them with integrity of heart. And I said to myself, yes, he was like that. His name was David, and he tended us in the church with honesty, loving us with the heart of a true shepherd. Now, I'm not thinking of David, son of Jesse. I'm thinking of David, son of Peter, a longtime bishop of Elkhart County, Indiana, D.A. Yoder. Now, I know the word bishop raises the hackles of some, but not mine. Perhaps it was because D.A. Yoder was one of the few bishops that I knew intimately. And I must say that my relationship to him has always been one of which he treated me with tenderness, and with love, and never harshly. For me, this bishop was a beautiful person. He saw me at my best, and he saw me at my worst. He baptized me as a lad of 12, and he helped me back into full fellowship in the Mennonite Church in 1947. And there was another 4 years of participation in the military during World War II. And he ministered to me in 1950 and 51 when I was seeking release from the United States Naval Inactive Reserve following the Korean War. Twice he helped me walk up to the front of Belmont Mennonite Church and seek forgiveness from the Brotherhood, both difficult experiences. And by my silence, I lied to him. But he forgave me with the very graciousness of God. I have vivid memories of this brother, this leader, some humorous and some very serious. And I remember looking at his patched rubber boots as I knelt in the Elkhart River at Studebaker Park the Sunday morning he baptized me. The day was sunny, but the water was cold, and I envied his dry feet as I knelt in that early spring water, nearly wet to my waist. At the time I was 12, and he was just next to 50. And as I look back from age 66, I think he deserved to keep his feet dry. And I recall his congregational prayers, always long, substantial, and effective, his wide open eyes sweeping over the benches as he took his flock to God. D.A. Yoder always prayed with his eyes open, beholding the objects of his prayers. The fact that I know tells you that I peeked, but never for long. I never wanted our eyes to meet as they swept down each row, touching each person. And it was as if he was introducing his flock to God and bringing each of us to the throne for healing. I stood in awe of the man as he graced the pulpit, yet I always sensed his common "we are brothers" spirit when dealing with him on a one-to-one basis. For me, he was God's man in contact with a Heavenly Father, and we had special connections. I remember him at communion time in those early bishop days, and there was no communion unless he could be there. Massive brother, powerful leader, but to me at that time and always a saint. Our minister at Belmont carried the plate of pure white bread cut in those neat, squared-off log-like planks. And Bishop D.A. Yoder, they came down the aisles, and he would pinch off a piece for each of us and placed it directly in our hands. And always those large eyes that looked deep into your soul and made you shiver with a delicious mixture of fear and happiness. You knew better than to take communion unworthily. It seemed to me as a boy that the bread came straight from God himself. And I say it with deep respect to this brother, and I can hear him say those soft-spoken words, "Take, eat, this body which is broken for you." And then came the common cup, and this was passed down to Rose with accompanying words that reminded you of the shed blood of Christ. Because of my participation in the war, I was not in full fellowship with the church for a number of years. My name was not taken off the church rolls, but I knew there would be no more communions until that was straightened back. Coming back from the war, my spiritual life was at a low ebb, if it flowed at all, and I did not seem to care. But I knew that I could not be reinstated and just slip quietly back into church, but need to be reinstated. And Bishop D.A. Yoder met me to hear my story, counsel, and make recommendations. At the time, I was attending Goshen College, and Bishop D.A. arranged to meet me there in one of the conference rooms. After some discussion, I agreed the need for a confession before the church in reference to becoming part of the military. About that time, the good bishop noticed a bracelet on my arm with the U.S. Navy serial number 6266476 engraved under my name. He wondered about it and thought it should come off. I agreed again and took it off, and it still lies in the dresser drawer. I've looked at it since, but I've never put it back on these 40 years after that time. That man talked to me like a father. He trusted me, but I did not deserve that trust. Upon discharge from the U.S. Navy, I had accepted release into the inactive Naval Reserve for a 4-year period. The bishop did not ask me about this. He probably had knowledge of the organization or that I was subject to recall in a national emergency. He probably had no knowledge. I certainly was not going to mention it to him to stir up the waters that were beginning to clear. But by my silence, I lied to the man who only wanted to help me, who himself had integrity of heart when I was dishonest. 4 years later, long after marriage, when I sought release from the military commitment during the time of national emergency, I had to go to that good man, shamefaced it, and tell him of my falsehood. It was a time of forgiveness on my part and understanding. We talked of what this would mean now and possibly of a military recall against my will and imprisonment. And when we faced that possibility, he looked at me with those big, large, soulful eyes with a slight smile on his lips, and he said, "And if you go to prison, either military or civil, I will come visit you." I did not smile. But things worked out, and by God's grace, Bishop D.A. Yoder continued to play an important part of my life. Always when he came to Belmont, or when I saw him at another church, I could sense his love and concern and his forgiveness. He said it with his eyes, and he often drew me with his firm hand and greeted me with a brotherly kiss of salutation. For me, D.A. Yoder was a man to love. Now, Mary Mishler met D.A. once at Elkhart General Hospital. She wondered who he was visiting, and he said, "Well, it depends. I come here to check on those in charge of the persons who never receive visitors, and then I visit them." That was D.A. Yoder. And later, as the bishop's health failed, I would visit him in the nursing home at Greencroft in Goshen. And I especially remembered some of those visits of our sharing of the past, the present, and the future. He knew where he was going. And I recall holding his hand and leaning over the bed so unashamedly to embrace the man, to give him back the kiss of love that he gave so often to me as a young, learning, struggling Christian. My last visit to see him was at the funeral home, paying my last respects to my beloved, plain-coated bishop. Well, that was not quite the last. Today, I visited Olive Mennonite Church Cemetery. I found the gray granite stone marking his grave and ran my fingers over the deeply etched initials and the name over the dates, 1883 to 1980. A milkweed plant had sprouted, and from the small evergreen shrub next to the stone, the stem arching over the stone, only the empty husks upon it. The seeds had scattered. It was symbolic. What was under the stone, wife Frances and D.A. Yoder, was not what mattered. They had scattered the good seed. It would grow again. Today was a gray day. The sun was shining only this morning, not while I was at the grave. It was near freezing, and I wanted to do something in that empty cemetery, nor did I care if those passing cars saw me. I knelt. I took off my hat as I always do when I pray, and I sensed God close with my eyes wide open. I thanked him for the man who was once in the body that lay beneath me. D.A. Yoder was one of several men who profoundly influenced my life. May God bless you all.